Now for Raising the Bar, Greater RVA's premier Law Talk radio show. Call into the show with your stories and questions at 804-454-1366. 804-454-1366.
Good morning and welcome to Raising the Bar, Greater RVA's Law Talk radio show. This is your host, Colleen Quinn of Locke & Quinn, and this morning we're going to talk about the Me Too movement, sexual assault and the law. Where are we now? Where are we headed? Why are so many women coming forward? And we're going to talk in an interview with Susheela Varkey and Valerie LaRue, who are from the Virginia Poverty Law Center and both specialize in different areas of sexual assault. I'm really excited to have both of you on the show this morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Colleen.
So for folks that are not familiar with Raising the Bar, if you go to the Raising the Bar website, www.raisingthebarlawtalk.com, we have all of the resources there for both pro bono and free resources. And the Virginia Poverty Law Center is actually listed there as one of those resources that's available. So these two ladies do a lot of hard work for a lot of folks that don't have the same access to the law that others might have that can afford it. Remember that Raising the Bar is sponsored by Locke & Quinn, and we are conveniently located in the Willow Lawn Shopping Center near a plethora of dining experiences. And we practice various areas of the law, family law, personal injury, malpractice, employment, estate planning, and of course, sexual assault is one of them. And I actually run a women's injury law center where we specialize in looking for civil recoveries for sexual assault and other acts of violence. So the three of us are well equipped to talk about the Me Too movement this morning. And Susheela, why don't you first tell us a little bit about what you do at the Virginia Poverty Law Center and the areas of sexual assault that you cover?
So just a little bit about Virginia Poverty Law Center specifically. Yes. We're the statewide support for all of the local legal aids in Virginia. So there are 9 main regional offices. So legal aid, for those of you who don't know, is civil legal assistance, which means for things that are not a crime, where you may need representation but cannot afford an attorney because you don't make enough of an income. If you meet the income eligibility requirements, you can apply for legal aid.
Right.
So the only issue is that legal aid offices all over the state and the types of things they would handle would be, for example, in family law, maybe divorce, custody, trying to get a protective order, those types of issues. If you can't afford to hire an attorney, you would go and see if you're eligible for local legal aid representation. But the problem is so many local legal aid offices are overwhelmed by the many people who would be eligible.
They are, and actually there is a video recording of Access to Justice that we did with Marty Wegbright and Allie Fannin, where we talked about all the resources that are out there and what was something that somebody might qualify for versus not, and the difference between civil and criminal, and how in a criminal case the court might appoint an attorney. So that's a really good program as an adjunct to this program as well, that kind of explains. And the two of you actually helped put together that resource list with me that's on the site.
Right. So with that, given that overwhelming nature of people needing these resources, I would say Valerie and I and all of the people we work with at Virginia Poverty Law Center get calls from folks who say, I've tried to get into legal aid, but they just can't take me right now. Please help me with this issue.
Right.
So I work on domestic and sexual violence issues. Valerie works on family and child welfare issues. We have a consumer attorney, healthcare, public benefits, all of the types of issues that you would imagine affect most people, especially low-income people.
Okay. Yeah. And Valerie, you've got a little bit of background in the sexual assault area as well, I understand.
Yeah, so I haven't been at VPLC as long as Susheela, but
she's a long-standing.
Yes.
Yeah, it's actually been 10 years. This is the longest I've ever been at any job.
So I've only been there a year and a half, but I did get started in this field by working at the State Coalition of Sexual Assault Crisis Centers, which is now the Virginia Domestic and Sexual Violence Action Alliance. So they're the statewide organization that works on policy issues and runs a statewide hotline for people who are in crisis, does trainings around sexual assault and domestic violence issues. So I worked there for about 6 years. And then after that, I was a public defender. So I've sort of seen.
Oh yeah, you've seen it from all different angles.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that you're familiar with some of the sexual assault issues involving children, including children in foster care. So that gives a completely different perspective on things, because we're not hearing from children necessarily as part of the Me Too movement. We're hearing more from the adults and maybe things that happened when they were children. But there's still the children out there that don't necessarily have a voice, and you're that voice for them in some ways.
And that's true. And a lot of children are afraid to speak up and don't speak up until they become adults. And
Right.
so that it's a huge problem that is sort of under the radar for that reason.
Right. So Susheela, let's get, we're going to talk about certain things that you do in your job and the landscape of the law governing sexual assault. But I kind of want to get to the heart of a certain question that's on everyone's minds. Why now? Why the Me Too movement now?
Right. I think reality is that people, men and women and children, have experienced sexual assault forever.
Right. We see statistics, 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4.
Right.
I mean, it no matter what the statistics are that you look at, it seems to be a pretty big percentage.
Right. But I think with the outcome of the most recent presidential election, and we have a president who on national television said he just grabs women by the blank.
But it's recorded, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I know that he backtracked on it and tried to couch it in so-called locker room talk, but that's an admission of a sexual assault, if you ask me. And there's this atmosphere, in my opinion, this is just my opinion,
right.
But if we had President Clinton as opposed to President Trump, I have a feeling people, especially women, might feel more like I'm being represented
right.
in leadership. I don't feel this urge to express what happened to me. And I think there's a lot of outrage right now, not to mention we were just talking about the fact that we have a president that just is not diplomatic, does not think before he talks. He just says what he thinks. So I feel like there's this atmosphere of, I need to tell what happened to me.
Right.
This is a reality. It's a fact. I can't hide it anymore.
Yeah. I mean, regardless of any political views, you look at Bill Clinton, and he got in trouble with Monica Lewinsky. So, he had his kind of secrets or dirt in his closet too.
Right.
And, but he didn't have the same level of outspokenness and candor. And
right.
So, you might say one benefit of Trump is the fact that he is very candid, I mean, it's right out there. And I think a lot of folks are kind of like, well, if the president can do it, so can I. And why am I now keeping certain things private or secret when I can be candid too,
Exactly.
And so we're kind of that. And I think also the social media and the ability for people to pop on YouTube and pop on Facebook and just, things go viral. And so we have systems in place now that kind of allow these momentums or movements, to occur.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then I think when you have the first person or the first big issue, like with Bill Cosby, think about all of the women over decades that have been coming forward. It's as if I think you feel safe. Someone broke that barrier.
Right.
Now I can tell my story. I don't have to be the first one, the trailblazer.
Exactly. So let's talk a little bit, Susheela, about how do the issues of sexual assault come up in your work? How do you work on a day-to-day basis? What are some of kind of the examples that you face?
So I would say, as I mentioned before, a lot of times people who cannot get into legal aid will end up calling me, and I'll talk with folks. Less so now, I've found. Fewer people are calling and actually leaving messages on my voicemail for the past year or so, but it used to be daily.
Wow.
I would get calls from folks who were legal aid eligible but couldn't get legal aid representation. So I found that folks, most of the time, they are calling about domestic violence issues, but often they're calling about sexual assault issues as well. And one of the things I found was that people were calling saying, I don't have legal status in this country, and this is what happened to me. I was sexually assaulted, or my husband was abusive to me, but I'm scared to say anything because I don't have legal status, and my abuser's telling me, or I believe I'm going to be deported if I report to the police. So there's that kind of fear, which abusers can use as part of their toolkit to keep victims from reporting crimes.
Right. I think folks that aren't citizens, that don't have green cards, are especially susceptible.
Absolutely.
As are the women that are in human trafficking, you know, that are basically held there by being addicted to drugs, et cetera.
Right.
You know, and I do adoption work too, as you know, and I've done a number of adoptions of women that have been snuck over the border and raped by, they say, the hyenas, actually, not the animal hyenas, but referring to the folks that have
the transporters.
Yes, exactly. And even they are so reluctant to come forward and place their child for adoption, you know, because they're so scared of the court system, so scared of being deported, so scared of saying anything about how it was that they got pregnant.
Right.
You know, but know also that if they do the adoption, they're able to put their child in the United States and make them a U.S. citizen. But that fear, I know that I've seen it myself, and it's really hard on those folks.
Sure. So from those calls, I found that I would say about half or more, whether from victims themselves or from advocates or frankly law enforcement, all different types of folks call me to get to brainstorm and to get answers.
Right.
So from that, I found that maybe half or more were not just about domestic or sexual violence, they were about the person's immigration status. Okay. So with the help of a private law firm that focuses on immigration law, Challa Law Offices, Lakshmi Challa used to be on Virginia Poverty Law Center's board, and she and I had been talking for years about how can we do something. So we started a fledgling immigration clinic, free legal clinic for undocumented or underdocumented, meaning like they might have a visa that's about to expire,
right?
To see if they qualify for certain types of visas. And there are some that are available for victims of violent crime like sexual assault. So as an example, there is a type of visa called a trafficking visa. If people are brought to this country against their will, force, fraud, or coercion to engage in either labor or sex trafficking. So with sex trafficking, we're talking about prostitution.
Right.
And I actually am about to file a trafficking visa on behalf of a client. And she was brought to this country. So the really insidious nature that I'm learning about trafficking is that the people who are the traffickers are often the boyfriend of the victim.
Right.
So that there's like a grooming of sorts that's involved of meeting a woman usually and falling in love, all of the things that go along with that, spending time together, and that trust building, and then saying, oh, I want to bring you to the United States, but you're going to have to pay me back. And, you know, I want you to have sex with my friend. It starts that way, and then it gets into serious prostitution. I know of, if you can believe this, a trafficking victim who was forced to have sex with up to 100 men a day.
Wow.
I can't even imagine.
Wow.
I mean, sorry, not a day, a week. 100 men a week.
That's still amazing. I mean,
yeah. So, I mean, it just boggles the mind that this is happening under our noses.
Right, but that honeymooning, that cycle of, I mean, it's not that dissimilar from domestic violence situations, you know, where we see somebody fall in love and they're actually still in love with the person that's putting them through this.
That they might have a child or more than one child with that trafficker, not to mention the fact that there's drugs involved, people forced to take drugs or ingest alcohol. So there's the substance use disorder aspect of it as well. And the fact of you're in this foreign country, you don't speak the language, you don't have any of your family members there. You are scared to tell your family because there's a shame involved, especially with sex trafficking. So it's so complicated and really feeds into traffickers being able to use people like commodities.
There's a common theme of dependency that runs through all sexual assault cases, whether it's the boss, the supervisor, there's the dependency on your job. So you're afraid to say something because you're afraid that you're going to lose your job. If it's in a school teacher type situation, you're afraid to do anything because you're going to get the bad grade. And then it gets even worse. And the dependency that you're talking about is an extreme dependency, but there's that complete dependency on your abuser.
Right.
And we see it
for
too.
Food, clothing, shelter, all these basic needs.
Right. And we see that parallel in the domestic violence arena too, where somebody is dependent upon their spouse or their abuser or their partner for all those basic needs. And then it's just basically accelerated or exacerbated when we look at the trafficking victims, because now there's the dependency on that person for staying in the United States as well.
Exactly.
And you throw in some addiction there, and if they're addicted to some chemical substance or drugs or whatever, now they're dependent upon the abuser to also as their supply source.
Plus there's this concept of the extreme hardship in going back to your home country. Many trafficking victims actually want to go, especially sex trafficking victims. It's like they want to rewind their lives and go back to their home country, but they can't because they won't be accepted. They'll be ostracized. They won't be able to support themselves. They don't want their families to be retaliated against because of the shame brought on the family by them.
Right.
So they don't often tell their families what's happening here in the United States. They just act like everything's fine and my boyfriend is wonderful and he bought me this, that kind of thing.
It's that same shame and, not wanting, there's a certain sense of guilt. Somehow I put myself in this situation and I can't seem to be able to tell anybody about it because then it's acknowledging that I let myself somehow get into this situation. It's real. The psychology behind it is really fascinating. So you have worked in that area of the law, especially with the visas that help with the trafficking situation. And I know you've also worked in a number of other areas of the law that impact sexual assault. So tell us a little bit about recent laws that have come into play that you've worked on to help sexual assault situations. And then we're going to talk a little bit about where are the problems still and what do we still need to fix going forward?
Right. So one of the things I was trying to think about what's happened over the past several years, especially the past 10 years. So one thing that has happened through the Virginia legislature is more notification about what trafficking is and posting notifications at truck stops, at restaurants, at strip clubs, at many different places where anybody can come into contact with a trafficking victim. So it's actually truckers that have noticed weird situations with a young woman and an older man. And that's where I think in Virginia that notification started at the truck stops.
Right.
These truckers have reported these weird situations and then police can investigate. It's not just a weird situation, it's a trafficking victim.
Yeah, and we had a speaker at one of the women's bar functions who basically made us more aware of just watching when we stay at a hotel or a motel what's going on around us, because oftentimes that's another environment where you see things that don't quite seem right,
Exactly.
People coming in and out of, men in particular, coming in and out of a particular room and, maybe seeing on occasion a young female at some points, or it's people guarding the door. So different things
right.
that kind of make you think a little bit more about what's going on there, and is it something that maybe we should alert somebody,
right.
to what's going on.
There's a bill in the legislature this year, actually, that I expect to pass that will require healthcare providers to post that notification about what is human trafficking. And if you spot human trafficking, here's the hotline to call.
Right. And it's not just a problem of folks being brought from other countries. It's a problem in the United States.
Absolutely.
And then there's also, even if it's not trafficking, we still have the problem of sexual assaults as part of domestic violence. So I know you've done some work on the Virginia's Crime Victim and Witness Rights Act, and some of the additional notifications in that act. And basically, can you talk a little bit about the requirements that somebody be provided the summary and given more notifications of what's happening in their case, et cetera, including notifications with obtaining a protective order. So talk a little bit, because I know you've worked on that.
I've worked on that somewhat tangentially.
Okay.
You can find that information about a victim's Bill of Rights. I think you can look that up, Google that.
Right.
And the Virginia Sexual and Domestic Violence Action Alliance, Valerie mentioned that organization. They are a coalition of the 60 plus local domestic and sexual violence programs in Virginia. They work more actively on those types of issues. Yeah, so I would say resort to them to look for that information. But in terms of some of the changes about protective orders over the last 10 years, if you remember the Courtney Love case, a young student at UVA, she was basically beaten and killed by an ex-boyfriend who was also a student, another UVA student. At the time, if she had wanted to get a protective order because she and the ex didn't meet the requirement of a family or household member relationship, she would have had to go and get a warrant for, ask for a criminal warrant for criminal sexual assault, fear of bodily injury or death, in order to ask for a protective order from General District Court. She wouldn't have been able to ask for it from Juvenile and Domestic Relations Court, which is very used to family issues of violence among family members, which is called family abuse in Virginia.
Right. And the other thing about that, too, Susheela, is if she could go to the juvenile court, that's a more confidential proceeding that is kept under seal. And in that case, in order for her to get that protective order, now she has to swear out a criminal warrant. So now she's bringing, and clearly when you have a boyfriend-girlfriend situation and there are issues going on, there's still that fundamental, you have feelings for that person, and you don't necessarily want to put them in a position of having a criminal record now.
And ruining his career and his
also,
life as a student, etc.
And now that becomes public if it's in General District Court as opposed to juvenile court. So there are all those different factors.
Exactly.
So tell us, I know that that you worked on basically helping change that.
Yeah, so about, I think it was 2010 or 2011 that the law changed to say when there's an act of violence, force, or threat that leads to bodily injury or fear of bodily injury, death, or sexual assault, you can get a protective order. You don't need the warrant.
You can go the more private juvenile court route. Great. We'll be right back after the break, and remember to call into the show with your questions.
With SRN News, I'm Rich Thomason in Washington. It is a rare tribute for a civilian to lie in honor at the U.S. Capitol Rotunda. An honor that has been bestowed upon Billy Graham, a private service this morning, and then the public will be able to pay its respects to the legendary preacher who died last week. President Trump has won a judge's permission to build a border wall with Mexico. The president tweeting big legal win today in response to that ruling. Dick's Sporting Goods will immediately end sales of assault-style rifles in its stores. It says it will not be selling guns to anyone under 21 years of age, following the school shootings in Parkland, Florida. On Wall Street this morning, stocks are opening higher. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 93 points, the opening bell. More details at srnnews.com.
Dennis Prager here, and for 2 years now, I've been telling you about my wife, Sue, who tried Relief Factor because of her knee pain, and it worked. And if you're struggling with ongoing back or neck pain, shoulder, hip, or knee pain, or general muscle aches and pain, do what my wife, Sue, did. Try Relief Factor. Go to relieffactor.com or call them toll-free 800-500-8384, 800-500-8384.
Hello, I'd like to deposit this to checking.
Fate is a fickle master.
What?
The future is uncertain.
Okay, and what's my account balance?
The horizon is cloudy. I see a long, treacherous voyage filled with great peril.
Look, can I just get a deposit slip or something?
A fortune bank teller. Surprising. What's not surprising? How much you could save by switching to Geico.
I see a yellow-eyed serpent and a low APR.
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more.
Please welcome to the stage, John Frederick.
You know, the president has a sense of humor. He's a funny guy. He loves to laugh. He has a sense of humor.
Only Rosie O'Donnell.
These Democrats who just want to live in the pit of misery, they have no sense of humor. When he said, if you're not standing up for my speech, that's like treasonous. I thought it was funny. The Senate can't pass a budget in 2 decades, but they have time to go in front of C-SPAN and make speeches about Trump's joke. There's the sense of humor.
Joke's on you if you missed the John Frederick Show. Weekdays 6 to 10 a.m. on WNTW, AM 820 and 97.7 FM.
Before a trip, you program your destination into the GPS. You need the best directions to get where you want to be.
You will arrive at your retirement in 8
It's the same for retirement. You need a voice to guide you. In Richmond, that voice is Isaac Wright. Join him every Saturday at 3 and Sunday at noon on WNTW 820 The Answer. Isaac's experience can help your retirement journey feel like a drive down easy street. Take the first step by tuning in Saturdays at 3 and Sundays at noon for Retire Right with Isaac Wright.
Arriving at your retirement.
Now, back to Raising the Bar. Call into the show with your stories and questions at 804-454-1366. 804-454-1366.
We are back. This is attorney Colleen Quinn with the law firm of Locke and Quinn, and I also run the Women's Injury Law Center. And this is Raising the Bar, Greater RVA's Law Talk radio show. Today we are talking about the Me Too movement, sexual assault and the law. Where are we now? Where are we going? And right before the break, Susheela, Varkey, and I were talking about the changes in the law with regard to getting a protective order. And we just wanted to make some clarifications. I know Susheela is going to have to unfortunately leave us, but we still have Valerie here. And so Susheela, let's just clarify the change in the law with regard to the protective order. We were talking about how you had to swear out the criminal complaint before if it wasn't a family member. And so tell us a little bit about how that changed.
Yes, absolutely. So that was in 2010 or 2011 that the law changed that if you can show that there was an act of violence, force, or threat that led to bodily injury or fear of bodily injury, sexual assault, or death, you can ask for a protective order. If you don't have the family or household member relationship, you go to general district court. The difference is that you just have to show that behavior. You don't need to swear out a criminal warrant.
Okay, and we were talking about the Courtney Love situation and how she would actually have to bring a criminal complaint.
Right.
But the law changed.
The law changed, so now anyone, whether you have that family or household member relationship, and just, I won't go through all the details of what that is, but basically spouse, former spouse, someone that you have a child with, someone that you have lived with as husband and wife within the last 12 months. Those are the kinds of people that we were talking about when we talk about family or household member relationship. There are some others that qualify as well. But Courtney Love, as a UVA student who did not meet any of those criteria with her ex, another student, at the time she would have had to swear out a criminal warrant.
Right.
Now someone in that situation just has to show the bad behavior, right?
Right.
That happened.
There's some threatening behavior. There's a concern there.
Right. They would still have to go to general district court, which, as Colleen mentioned, is more of an open court and things are not kept confidential. You could have so many people in the courtroom while you're asking for this protective order.
Right. Which is still intimidating, but I guess that's one of the things in the future. There's future law to be made.
Exactly.
So you got some more work to do.
Yes, getting
Susheela.
more resources for the courts would be helpful.
Right. And speaking of work, I know that you need to go. So thank you so
Yes.
much for joining us
Thank
this
you
morning.
so
Really
much. It's
appreciate
been a
it.
pleasure. Take
Great.
care. You're in good hands with Valerie.
Oh, absolutely. And we've got a caller on the line. We've got Diana from Richmond. Diana, you are live.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I have a question that you may have already addressed, but what does a person need to do in order to file a protective order against someone that they do not live with? What are the steps that you follow?
Well, and thank you so much, Diana, for calling in. I think as Susheela already indicated, if you don't live with the person, then you no longer have to swear out the criminal complaint, but you still do have to bring a warrant in general district court and establish for the court that there is some threatening behavior. And Valerie, you help me out here, that there is something that is going to prompt the judge to say, yes, a protective order is needed in this situation. I know I had a case actually where it was just threats made via text. I'm going to get you, that's those sorts of statements. And in that case, the judge felt that just the text threats were sufficient. Valerie, have you had experience with some of the things that prompt a judge to issue a protective order?
Yeah, so I always recommend that people document all those things, because usually it's not just a one-time incident. And in fact, a judge is much more likely to give a protective order if it's sort of been ongoing.
Right.
If you get those texts, don't delete them. If somebody, leaves you a threatening voicemail message, save that. So you want to be able to go to court and show those texts and play those messages. And I always recommend people keep maybe a diary, because sometimes people will do things that there's no documentation of. So maybe they might come and just yell at them at the door or something like that. So write down, on this day, he came to my house and yelled at me or threatened me or whatever it is. Because otherwise you go into court and say, well, it happened some time ago, I don't remember. But if you can say it happened on this day, and this is what happened, and then it's much easier. If there have been any reports to the police, also, keep copies of anything that you get from the police. And of course, the police will have a record of your having called.
Right. And then I've had a case too where it was all recorded on the cell phone. And so basically getting permission to take that into court or recording that onto another device. And I find that the court administrators and clerks tend to be very helpful in those situations. So Diana, basically to answer your question, if it is not a family member or spouse, et cetera, as for example, the Courtney Love case, you would still have to go to general district court and swear out that warrant, but you would not have to actually bring a criminal complaint, which is the change that Susheela was pointing out. So does that answer your question, Diana?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. Thank you so much for calling into the show. And remember, if anybody does have questions about sexual assault, anything related to the Me Too movement, you can call into the show at 804-454-1366. So I am talking to Valerie LaRue of the Virginia Poverty Law Center. And Valerie, let's talk a little bit about some of the sexual assault situations that you encounter in your daily work.
So one of the things that I do is work with women whose children have been put in foster care. And what I'm finding is that a lot of those women have many times were themselves in foster care, and often were horrifically abused, physically and sexually abused as children, sometimes by the originating family, sometimes by foster families.
Right.
And a lot of them have bounced from foster home to foster home where they haven't really established. So they've never really learned how to be a parent.
Right. And they don't know what normal behavior is. There's kind of this cycle of abuse that keeps fostering itself.
Exactly. And one of the things I think is not very intuitive for people is that if, sometimes you think, well, if somebody was themselves abused, they would have a lot of sympathy for someone else who has been abused. And counterintuitively, that's not always the case, because sometimes what they've done is they've turned the anger. This is a very common thing that happens to women who have been victims of sexual abuse, is that they tend to turn their anger at themselves. Either the that they believe that somehow it was their fault. Like you got into that earlier,
Right.
That somehow they brought this on themselves, or the abuser has told them that. And that's one of the shocking things, is that abusers will tell children, this is your fault. And so children, of course, tend to believe when adults tell them.
Right.
So they grow up thinking this is my fault. So if their own child goes into foster care because of abuse, a lot of times they think, oh, well, it was my fault when I got abused, so it's their fault when they were abused. And so there's sort of this cycle of passing on that sort of shame and sense that I must have done something. So trying to help people in the foster care system understand that the children, may have been sexually abused, but the mom may have been sexually abused also. And she may not have ever told anyone that. Right. And she may be behaving in such a way that people are like, why is she acting this way? And they don't understand there's this underlying problem that she's never addressed, because she didn't even know that she had the right to address it. And that's one of the things I think, so cycling back to the Me Too movement, is that I think for the first time that women are being so vocal and coming forward, they've said, I've had enough of this. And that when they come forward and say, this happened to me and it was that person's fault, it makes women take a second look at things that happened to themselves and say, oh, maybe it wasn't my fault. Maybe I've been silent with shame all these years, thinking I did something to make this happen, when in fact it was really that other person's fault. And so now they're coming forward, and I think that we'll start seeing two things happening. One is, more people getting the help that they need.
Right.
More recognition of how that early childhood trauma affects people and how it gets passed on to the next generation. And then also more accountability for the people who are causing these things. They've been getting away with this for a long time because of that shame and secrecy, and nobody's, willing to speak up. Now they're being called to account.
Oh, yeah.
And another thing I think that with the laws that are happening, there's a woman, and I can't remember her last name, but her first name is Erin. She was sexually abused multiple times by two different people when she was a child, and she is on a crusade to get Erin's law passed in all 50 states. And so in Virginia this year, we're seeing Erin's law being proposed. Senator Jennifer McClellan has proposed an Erin's law bill. There's been a lot of, it still hasn't passed the Virginia General Assembly yet, and we have about 10 more days.
Oh, no. I got to get you back to work, Valerie.
But that's one of the things. And that would mandate that children in schools, as part of the family life curriculum, learn more about what is sexual assault, what do you do if someone is sexually assaulting you, how to not sexually assault.
Right.
Because I think we see two different kinds of sexual assaults. And I think that makes things sort of confusing for people. So we have one kind of sexual assault where people are deliberately going out to hurt someone. We have another kind of sexual assault, and this is the one I think that people feel confused about, where someone doesn't really understand that that's what they're doing, that they're hurting another person. And a part of it is because we don't teach people what are personal boundaries, what is consent, what is okay, what do you need to ask someone, before proceeding. How do you know that the person wants you to proceed, or are you just sort of pushing your own agenda, thinking, oh, well, this is what I'm supposed to do? So sort of putting Erin's law would in all 50 states, and of course it's a state by state law, so every law is going to be slightly different, but make it so that people, children start learning those things. How do I behave respectfully towards other people?
Right. And so you've hit upon a number of different interesting issues. One is, first of all, the Me Too movement helping with empowerment and a sense of I'm not alone. Okay, so there are other people out there, which is almost a self-realization of, wow, okay, this isn't right. This isn't normal. And the next thing that you hit upon was education. And I think with the Me Too movement, people are now getting better educated about what is normal, what should be acceptable, what should not be acceptable, what's not acceptable in the workplace, what's not acceptable in terms of dating behavior, in terms of consenting versus not consenting. And then another thing is, as lawyers, being able to understand some of the psychology going on. I know that with the Women's Injury Law Center that I run, we have a lot of cases where there's sexual assault incidents. And then what will happen is, after the sexual assault, the woman will go out, and I've seen it over and over, and she will have more sexual relations and actually be somewhat promiscuous. And there's a whole psychology there of her trying to take ownership of what happened to her. And then that gets used against her as if, okay, well, that sexual assault must not have impacted you because now you're going out and you're having sex with other people. Although what she's trying to do is she's trying to justify what happened. She's trying to take ownership of what happened. She's trying to control something that she wasn't able to control in the first place. And the more we get into the psychology, the harder it becomes to kind of understand what's going on. But at least as we get into it, we're able to start to be able to explain things. And as lawyers, we almost need to kind of rely upon a lot of counselors and psychologists, et cetera,
very much so,
to really understand why is the victim behaving this way. And that ties into what you were saying about that cycle of sexual assault and domestic violence in the foster care system and folks that have been abused as children and then them repeating it. And breaking it at that education level in the school system really seems to be one of the remedies.
And I think one of the things that we, you earlier were referenced to how, it seems to be more okay to talk about these things now.
Right.
Partly because we have someone in the White House who basically says whatever he thinks. And, and is it okay now for us to come forward and just say, maybe since there's no shame there, the shame that we have often internalized as victims, maybe now we're realizing that's not my shame. And so it's okay for me to talk about it. But I think as a society, we've generally made, anything having to do with sex not okay to talk about, and certainly the violent aspects of it. And so I think that, one of the things that the Aaron's Law would do is create a conversation.
Right.
So that, and I think parents need to talk to their children, and they need to say things like, it's not okay to touch other people, and teach them things like when my son was a child, if somebody came up and wanted to hug him and he didn't want to hug them, our impulse is to say, oh, hug Uncle John, he wants to hug you, why are you not hugging him? But that sexual abusers use that as their foot in the door to sexual assault. So I think parents need to know that when their children are children, and their children are very intuitive. And a lot of times, children will say, so-and-so creeps me out. And children need to be taught that it's okay to listen to that voice saying, so-and-so creeps me out. And parents often, we want to be nice to everyone. And so we think, oh, well, give them a hug anyway. We really shouldn't be teaching our children that. We should be teaching our children to listen to their inner voice and draw a boundary. Maybe maybe it's just a capricious thing on the part of the child that day,
right.
But allowing them to have control over their own body and say, no, I don't want to hug Uncle John, teaches them that later on, if someone is sexually, crossing their boundaries, that it's okay to say, I don't like this, no, stop.
Yeah.
And instead we teach children, if an adult wants to touch you, then you ought to let them touch you. So I think that's one of the things that parents need to start looking at, is how are they teaching their children both about touching other people and allowing other people to touch them, even in seemingly non-sexual situations.
I had a whole conversation with a group of ladies at a luncheon lately about the hug, okay? And it's a real dilemma because with the Me Too movement, there's kind of, are we going to lose the hug? And children need to be hugged. And I'm a hugger. And so, but it's really talking about boundaries in terms of, when is a hug wanted? When is it not wanted? And that goes to the whole arena of sexual assault. It's what's welcome versus what's not welcome. And children need to be taught, as you just indicated, about when maybe they don't want the hug from that person. Maybe that is not a hug that's going to make them feel good throughout the rest of the day. And we both have experienced that as women sometimes, when we get the hug that's a little too close, a little too hard, a little too pushed up against, the front chest area, held a little too long, as opposed to the quick feel good. I just want to give you a quick hug because, well, you just adopted a baby, or you just lost a parent, or, those sorts of things. And so we really don't want to lose the hug. It's just a matter of kind of identifying when is it welcome, when is it not welcome. And I've even started when I have clients with a happy occasion, I will say, are you a hugger? I'll try to ask permission almost, and if I get a kind of I'm not really a hugger, then I'll shake their hand with a two-handed handshake, which is a little bit warmer. But it's it's a real dilemma. It's a tough area to try to figure out how do you deal with the hug, you know?
And I think, it's not that we don't want to be touching each other, because we do. That's a human need to touch each other. The question is paying attention to the signals that the person is giving you. If they're sort of shrinking back, like, don't
force it. Yeah.
You know, pay attention to what the other person wants, and then it will be nicer for you too. You know?
So working in the area that you work in, you've identified in particular the need for education, and you're working on that with Jennifer McClellan. And so what is exactly the bill that you're trying to get passed in the next 10 days?
Well, I'm not working too much myself on that particular bill.
Okay.
I know the Action Alliance is really working on it, but it's Senate Bill 101.
Okay.
And I know there are a lot of different groups who are sort of hashing out what the final wording will be.
Gotcha.
But I think that's just really important that our children, have access to information, so they don't go out into the world just not knowing, what is okay and what isn't okay, what's okay, where can I put my boundaries. So I think we just need more openness and more education. I think there's some people have expressed, oh, well, this didn't happen, 50 or 100 years ago. Well, it did happen.
Right. Just nobody talked about it.
Nobody talked about it. And people, girls who got pregnant as a result of sexual assault were sent away.
Oh, right.
And a lot of them were, felt like, oh, I can't get married now because I'm ruined or something like that. So,
and adoptions were taboo, and now we've got a whole new day, a whole new world.
Exactly. So it's not that it's happening more now, it's just that we're more willing to talk about it. And ultimately that's a good thing, even though it seems like, oh, all this stuff happening.
So working in the area that you work in, where do you see that we still need changes in the law, that where do we need to go from here? What additional things can we as lawyers or assisting with bills in the legislature, where do we need to go in terms of the future?
Well, I think there's actually some really encouraging things that are happening. And one of those things is trauma-informed care. And what that is it's having an understanding that anytime you provide a service to someone, that it may not be obvious, but it may be that the issue that they have is because of that childhood trauma. And so I saw a number of bills this year that had that, trauma-informed whatever.
Okay.
And so, for instance, when I was a public defender, I learned that a lot of my female clients especially, but male clients too, had been victims of sexual assault as a child. And that's why they have a drug addiction problem, for instance.
Right.
And so this has led them directly to becoming involved in the criminal justice system. Or earlier you were talking about sex trafficking. I had a client who was arrested on a drug charge, but it turned out she was being sex trafficked. She and a bunch of other women were taken to another state and held in a motel where they were required to prostitute themselves. And my client told me that one of the girls, the Johns pay the girls directly, but then the girls had to give it to their pimp, that one of the girls kept some of the money because she felt like, well,
right,
hey, this is my money.
Exactly.
And what happened was she ended up falling off the balcony of this motel. Now, nobody saw it happen,
right?
But the other girls took that as a warning. This is what's going to happen to you.
Oh my goodness!
And her child was taken away and put in foster care. So you see that when you go back to a lot of behaviors that look like, oh, this person is acting out, they're behaving badly, being sexually assaulted is sort of the nexus of how did this happen. It's true for men as well. And one of the things that, you were citing some statistics, it's generally the statistics are that 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 girls has been sexually assaulted. But a lot of people don't realize that 1 in 5 or 6 boys have been sexually assaulted.
Wow.
And as hard as it is for girls to talk about sexual assault, it's even harder for boys to talk about sexual assault. And boys tend to, girls tend to turn their anger inwards and blame themselves. And boys do the same thing too, but a lot of times they're more, because it's more acceptable in our society for boys to be angry and aggressive, they're also sometimes more likely to turn that aggression outward. So again, you can see a boy who's acting, or a young man who's acting in a sort of violent, aggressive way. A lot of times you go back into the history. And so that's what I found as a public defender. A lot of times people said, oh, how could you go from a victim organization to being a public defender? And I was like, you know what? I see people on both sides.
Oh yeah.
And
Well, it's a real problem too, because recognizing abnormal behavior when you're talking about the boys, and I've had a couple of cases involving church and basically altar boys, etc. And one gentleman, it was really, really, really hard for him to share the story, but the story was that the priest that he was working with would anoint his penis with oils and everything, and this was part of the ritual that they would have. And he had this poor child convinced that this was part of what the church did. It was like a kind of a sexual baptism of sorts. And for most of his life, this poor man, thought that this was normal. This was part of a ritual, but it was also done in secret. This was a secret ritual that only special altar boys, would be so anointed. And just trying to talk about that was so difficult for this gentleman. And then when it came to actually bringing that forward, I said, we can bring this forward legally. We can bring this forward. And actually, most people don't realize that in Virginia, there is a 20-year statute of limitations for abuse as a child that runs from 20 years from the date to that a counselor helps you to identify that what happened was sexual abuse. Okay, so that poor man did not realize that this anointment ceremony, this secret anointment ceremony, was sexual abuse, but through therapy had identified it as this is abnormal behavior. When you're talking about educating these kids in the school system, that would have been something that would have been flagged as, oh, maybe this is not normal for somebody to be, touching my private parts and anointing with oil, et cetera, and rubbing it in an anointment ceremony. That is not normal behavior. And so you have this 20-year time frame now, which is amazing. But then we still have to overcome the hurdle of, okay, the shame of I allowed that to happen to me. Why didn't I realize that was not normal behavior? And can I really bring it forward at this point? Because I can't, once you bring a lawsuit, it's no longer private. Family's going to know, friends are going to know, et cetera. And then getting over that hump can be really difficult. And so what happens is now we don't hold these perpetrators accountable, which is another issue. So when you hit upon the education piece, if we can educate, we can empower, we can teach folks that they do need to speak out. And that's the wonderful thing about the Me Too movement too, is that people are feeling that sense of empowerment. So Valerie, before we close out the show, are there any other examples or things that you're seeing in the sexual assault arena in what you do that you'd like our listeners to know about?
Well, I really think that having that awareness that when you're talking to someone, chances are, I always think about this when I'm in a room giving a talk, for instance, that chances are up to a third of the people in that room have been victims of sexual assault. And so what I want to be able to do is speak respectfully of those people.
Right.
And I think that, when we go around in our daily lives and we're talking about these issues, sometimes we talk about them in ways that are angry or disrespectful to the victims, or make assumptions about things and realize that the person you're talking to may be a victim and they may be being re-traumatized right at that moment in the way that you're speaking about it. So have some thought about that. Have some thought about how people are acting in ways that may not make sense to you, and maybe the reason that they're behaving in that way may be because of this.
Right. So this has been wonderful. We've had Valerie LaRue of the Virginia Poverty Law Center, and join my former law partner Mike Phelan next week for Exploding E-Cigs and Other Product Liability Matters. Thanks for joining us.